I have a question for you. Are you an architect and are you broke? If the answer is yes, it's what I've suspected for many years, as I am indeed an architect myself. This podcast is about debt in the profession of architecture, and I want to hear from you. Are you just surviving month to month with no extra money for savings? Or are you seriously broke and in debt and stress and worry about your income? Or does your wife, husband, or significant other earn substantially more than you, which gives you a great life, given the ability to choose your clients, when you work, and who for? Or have you attained financial freedom in architecture? If you're in the first two categories, surviving month to month, or facing financial difficulties, how is this affecting your mental health? Are you suffering from depression or even despair? We need to talk about the impact of debt, but also, more importantly, how to get out of debt. And I need you to come forward to make this podcast possible. Welcome to The Broke Architect. You will hear from real architects with very real problems, and maybe some will offer some real solutions so that you never become a broke architect. Please share, subscribe, and comment to support the channel. I have with me Andy Shaw, who is an architect at AMA, who are architects in Dubai. Just firstly, welcome to this, what is the first season of The Broke Architect. And Andy, I just really wanted to, if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself and your sort of background growing up and where you grew up.
Okay, yeah. I grew up in Edinburgh, Scotland. Was born there, went to school there, so the centre of Edinburgh. I wonder how it kind of relates to architecture. Did have at school a very good art department, just by kind of chance, and finding that was probably the subject I found most enjoyable, whilst also doing sciences and other things. It's a kind of the classic answer: science and art, which we know is not really the route to architecture, but it did kind of it definitely started the interest in art. And I remember thinking at the time, when you start thinking about what work you're going to do, that I was very worried that any of the job was very repetitive, because many jobs, even a kind of high skilled job or a professional job, it can be quite, but you get narrower and narrower and you do the same thing over and over again. And I knew that I found that very difficult and boring, but I enjoyed it at school. The atmosphere of the art studio at school was one thing. It was like the most social and fun, which does kind of carries on through architecture school when it's good, and in an office when it's good. And also, the kind of being any creative industry, it's never quite the same. It's always, you're embracing new things, new technologies, design evolves all the time. And part of the process, it's not quite the same each time, even when you have workflows and structures of projects and things, it's always a bit different. I was never so specifically into buildings and things. My father studied in Glasgow and was very into Charles Rennie Mackintosh, and we had quite a few books around and furniture. Some furniture his carpenter friend made that was actually used in the school refurbishment. We had a few pieces around, so there was definitely some art and culture around the house. And then I went from school in Edinburgh to study in London at the normal age, 18 or so, I think. Actually, I did have a year out before, because I was quite young in the Scottish system. I was finished school 17. I took a year out. I spent most of actually working in an office in Edinburgh. And in one sense, since a very young age, I was always working, paper rounds and weekend jobs. And then I spent most of my year out working in an office, so before doing any architecture, I was already measuring some churches in Edinburgh and drawing some plans by hand and die lining and things and making models, taking photos of sites. So I had started already to do a bit of work, and because I knew I was going to be studying architecture that year.
Great. No, it's just maybe if I can take you back to that time when you were there and you were thinking about studying architecture, and I'm just interested in your perception of the architect, and you know, growing up in Edinburgh as well, you know, did you think that an architect was that profession was highly paid?
Now I remember when you had the careers advisor at school having the obligatory meeting, saying, "Oh, you're aware that architecture doesn't pay very well compared to other professions, and your friends will have better cars quicker," things like that. I said, "Well, I don't drive," so and brushed it off. I was warned a bit, but you know, it did have some sort of, it'd be friends' parents or parents, my parents' friends who were architects, and they, but that was, you know, they were probably over the age of 50, and they weren't, and they're, you know, well off enough to have a comfortable life in Edinburgh anyway. So I didn't know it was not as well paid as some other career choices, but knew there's also paying a kind of livable income. Well, this was at the time, this was in the late 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, no. That's interesting, because I think you know, I've spoken to a lot of people maybe who are newly qualified, and their perception was before they went to study architecture that it was quite highly paid. And I'm always a little bit concerned about that, because when you know, with a simple Google, you can find out an architect's average salary and work out that it's not particularly up there with doctors and lawyers and things,
No.
you know. So I was really interested in that. And then you went, as I understand it, to the Bartlett in London. Just tell me about that, and you know, how we're studying at the Bartlett.
I know it's obviously come up a lot in the last year or two, and my personal experience, I'd say, was like Charles Dickens: the best of times and the worst of times. I do have some amazing memories there. Particularly, I realized, though, retrospecting more in the last year, obviously, the people I met there, the fellow students, were probably the best thing. It was a real nice group of people, stayed friends of a long time, and still some of them, very great energy atmosphere. The low points were linked to the stress put on us. I kind of managed, I realized also that I kind of navigated always to the easygoing tutors, maybe, and found a path of low resistance. But there was a lot of pressure put on us. The worst things I saw was probably happening to some close friends, having a very tough time. I did have a few periods of major kind of, you know, just stress, doubt, and difficulties. But yeah, I mean, it's funny looking back. Some very tough moments, but also some amazing experiences and moments. So, but that's quite formative. Gave a good work ethic. Met a great group of people that when started working in industry, is also building up a network and things. I'm still in touch with some of my tutors as well, and the people from that era. It was definitely an intense experience, I would say.
Well, this podcast is definitely not a podcast about the Bartlett. It's but yeah, as it's quite topical and has been in the last couple of years. What's happened there? I mean, I'm interested in, you know, you went through that sort of experience, and you know, passed your enough to become an architect. I'm just interested then. You left university. Were you in debt? Did you take a student loan?
Yeah, I think it probably helped give some context for this. So I was the last year of students that didn't pay tuition fees. Lucky me. The year after, I think it became £1,000 a year, and then, as you know, every few years it crept up to whatever it is now, 9,000–10,000, I think. So I didn't pay tuition fees, although I think now, if you live in Scotland, you may still not. I think you don't pay tuition fees still, but it was at that point, you know, nobody was going to university paying tuition fees. There wasn't really used to be pay the living allowance more commonly a decade or two before me, but there wasn't really that student loans had come in. So I went. I'd been working before university, so I had a little bit of money saved, but so I went into university without debt, and I wasn't paying for university. But I think there are things probably to help understand in the rest of the discussion. Looking back, so both my parents worked for the health service. So growing up, financially very comfortable, but also very stable life. Because when you work for the health service, or probably also if you're a high school teacher or something, you don't deal with recessions, companies going bust. It's not as volatile. It's very, very stable. Or academia is probably similar. So you have a financially very stable and secure period with no big, riding through all the crashes and things, which probably meant that actually now myself at that time was not so used, not prepared to deal with the kind of money problems, volatility, and managing money so well. And I think it took me a lot longer, 10 years later, I actually took these things more seriously. So I went to university. And it was London, it was expensive, field trips were expensive, materials. I was getting help from my parents. I was working every summer. But I basically started going into debt slowly. And really for the next 10 years, even when working, was never quite enough to manage all the things I wanted to do.
That's interesting, because you stayed in London. As I understand it, you went and worked for very, very good practice, Hopkins and Partners. But you still, that salary still could not sustain you or stop you from going into debt. Is that
no, it was pretty tight, I'd say. And so I think from the personal side, there's also, I became more mature dealing with money. It was, they paid me 15,000 when I was a year out. Right. Actually, I mean, Hopkins were very good and very stable financially, but they weren't the highest payers. So some of the big commercial companies paid a bit more, but they were actually otherwise quite mature, treated people well, paid for part 3, that kind of thing. And the salaries had crept up over time as well. Part 2 was getting to 23,000. I did part 3 there as well. So in that time, I mean, living in London, it was a bit tight. But see, I know now you can always cut your expenses as well. And being in an early 20s, this was pre-financial crisis. Yeah. I tell many young architects I meet now, it was a very different atmosphere then. And in hindsight, maybe the few times in the UK, there's a very positive atmosphere in there. The building schools of the future, Olympics coming up, and it was a very, very happy and great time actually working there. Very good atmosphere in the office. They meant it was Friday night drinks, lots of parties and things. And I wasn't being particularly decadent or anything, but just living a social life and a normal life. Ended up always, the salary had gone by the end of the month, had an overdraft of £2,000, and all the kind of extra stuff like holidays, wedding, stag do requests to go to, and things. It started building up to the point I think I was at £18,000 of debt, probably getting 1,000 or 2,000 each year over that period. So I think from starting studying, it slowly accrued basically.
That's quite a lot of money if you put it in today's context.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by that it was growing up. So maybe it was 1,000 or 2,000 a year, and there's a few bumps. So probably before I came to Dubai, by 2010, I had about 17,000-18,000 of debt.
Wow. Yeah, I just thought I'd put that figure of £18,000 in context. If that money was 18,000 was in 2002, today in 2023, to give you an idea of what that debt is, it's £37,464. So I just thought I'd drop that one in. You were carrying that debt. What was going through your mind at that time? Were you trying to look at ways to resolve the debt?
Yeah, even Hopkins helped at one point by giving an interest-free loan to then pay them off. I was juggling credit cards as well. There's a bit of a mixture. I also had this kind of Del Boy-like confidence that eventually it'll come good. But every now and then also, I'd kind of get the statement and go, oh my God, this is serious, and get a bit of a panic and think how, when you realize how much that is in terms of, that's like a year's work after salary, how are you going to pay this off? and you're dreaming of some kind of windfall or something to do it, because to do it away more slowly is very difficult. So there were sometimes it really hit is, oh, this is really dangerous. But I remember one of my best friend's weddings. I said I couldn't go to it because I couldn't take on that extra expense. And I mean, by the time you start working, it's like, your salary is what it is. You're not really going to get much more by moving. A little bit, not much. I was even doing a little bit of external already, kind of gigging on the side, like market research, a little bit of private work, maybe bringing in a couple of £1,000 a year extra. But it was never quite enough. Now, in hindsight, I think maybe I could have cut back a lot more. There's a side to money of being also kind of the discipline to control your spending, because you have more control of that than your income in a way. And I think it took time to hold back on buying. I used to buy lots of CDs, and just socializing, going out for drinks. In your early 20s, it's quite a lively time. It's when you don't have much money though. So there's a bit of self-control. The other thing, my friends who are not architects are obviously earning more. Some of them a lot more if they're in finance and things. And the many times you're kind of going to these other social occasions, the costs are beyond what you can afford, really.
Yeah.
But I was still there trying to pay and get on.
Can I ask, did it ever at any point keep you awake at night, thinking about this debt? Or was it like a constant thing that was on your mind, or was it just something you thought about at the end of the month when you had to make them payments?
It wasn't constant. It was just flare up every now and then and realize, oh, this is quite serious. And then it's sadly, it's probably easier to forget about it and push it to the future, because that's that's the thing with debt. But obviously, I know in hindsight as well, whether it's credit card companies or the banks, they're keen to get you in debt because you're a cash flow for them, an income stream for them.
Yeah.
So they sometimes make it easy to do it. I remember this before the credit. So I got a phone call saying, "Oh, we can offer you £3,000 interest-free loan." Was it why? Because and also it would kick into 20% probably 6 months later or something. But I said, well, I don't need it. Oh, but why don't you get your friends a present or get your parents a present? Like, get off. So there's some people quite aggressively chasing you to put you in debt.
Yeah.
But, so one thing I had to kind of obviously get a control over your own willpower to control any spending and just have it's kind of financial discipline. And I think I learned about financial literacy, learning how debt can build up and interest, and how really to kind of budget for yourself and control what you're doing. And that went to say yes and no.
Yeah, I mean, lastly, before we leave this part of the this part of the question in a way, it's did you ever? I know you're in your 20s, but did you ever feel a need to tell your parents? Were they aware of this? Were your friends aware of this?
They probably weren't really, or not quite the scale of the problem.
Yeah.
They probably knew there's a bit of credit card debt that you should probably try to clear that. They probably didn't know that it was as much as 18,000.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, because it's a bit of a shame, I guess. But in hindsight, like it was quite serious. I was probably mentally putting it under the carpet, wishing to sort it out another day before me to go away.
Yeah. And you got to the point where an opportunity came along. If you can just tell us about where you are now, the move to Dubai and the practice you went to work for.
Yeah, I mean, so after kind of 10 years or so in London, some things changed. And I think one big event for me, I think the biggest event of my life was the financial crisis back in like 2007, 8, and that it really changed the atmosphere at work very quickly, from being quite joyous to much more cautious and cliquey and things. Everybody felt a lot more pressure, a lot less, a lot worse atmosphere. And I decided actually one thing actually happened shortly after that is even with debt, actually, I started thinking I was about 30 years old. What should I start looking to buy a house? And maybe actually my parents would help the deposit. I could borrow off my salary, which had gone up a bit by then with Part 3 and things, and investigating this. And I remember getting, and back then actually for like 250,000 pounds, you could still buy in London a reasonable livable flat. Actually, it went up hugely, I think, a few years after. But when I went, I got the key fact statement from the bank that they're obliged to give you by law, and it was saying how the mortgage debt to them works out to kind of like 150,000 pounds of interest you pay over the lifetime. And I was realizing they just all the bank bailouts and everything. So I've got to give like 4 or 5 years of my working life just for the interest, for the pleasure of having a house that I'm going to work. The amount of work I saw that as becoming money to pay them for that. But this is crazy, especially after all that financial turmoil. And I think also, going back when I was younger, money was never dealt with the economy, because in the health service you're insulated from that. And I got more interested in the economy, economics, finances, covering all things like debt, economics, and how that works as an individual and for companies. And that probably changed my perception and my behavior. I don't know, it's coincidence, but I met my wife about the same time, who happens to be an accountant, who now in finance. So maybe that also got me thinking a bit more, becoming more financially literate. And I read lots of books and some magazines and got more interested in the topic, which before I'd kind of brushed off. Again, you think, oh, we're a creative person, don't want to deal with this. This is for bankers and things. But I became much more aware and interested in finance and economics. And I'd also decided that I was keen to leave London and go to another country, because I'd spent all my life in the UK. I thought I'm running out of time to properly experience another country, like many people I knew had, and started thinking about how to go abroad and where to go. So about this time, one of my managers and friends from Hopkins had moved to Dubai to join RMGM a few months before, and had asked me to come join him. And after thinking about it, I said yes. And then because of the still post-financial crisis and problems in Dubai still that are even more severe than the UK, it took about a year for that to become a contract and a proper offer to go out. But yeah, I decided to leave. And so, as well as having enjoyed but got a bit tired of London, it was also the financial side. I realized actually to progress in London, UK was going to be quite difficult, and in this post-crisis environment, it's probably not going to get better. I remember the big bank bailouts is ultimately going to be paid for by the citizens. Yeah. There's been quantitative easing and things, and it's like there's going to be a bad period. I don't want to pay for someone else's mess. I'm going to go, and that led to looking at opportunities abroad. And the big companies in the UK, they tend to have offices in like Asia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Middle East. These were seen as places that would be quite easy to move to and experience something else. So it was driven. It was quite largely financially driven, but also a chance to get a change of lifestyle and experience when it was still possible.
So you were left for Dubai with £18,000 of debt. I just want to really ask you, how long did it take before things really improved?
So, I mean, the debt wasn't going away; it was growing when I was in the UK. Yeah, and when I left, when I came to the UAE, my salary, I did well. I came into quite a good management position. Dubai salaries are higher, but I came in luckily in a senior role, not a junior role. But my salary almost doubled, and there's no tax. Now, I think we might discuss a bit later. I can tell you about how the finances and fees and salaries work in the UAE. But going when I did, when you're kind of an experienced architect, but not, but still, I didn't have children at the time, and I wasn't 50 years old or anything. But kind of experienced enough to go into a management position, it meant there's a kind of bigger jump at that level. So I came to the UAE, and but I think I'd been saying by that time, in that year or two, I'd started being much more conscious and aware of finance, personal finance, and things. So it kind of came, and also I knew that Dubai had problems. The company I was joining, RMJM, had financial problems. So I was very much more cautious on spending, basically, and everything was kind of quite low risk, and also where it was at that time, especially, it could all end any month you have to go. So you're kind of much more cautious. And maybe the years before, people would pick somewhere very nice to live and buy a car and stuff. I was always and my wife were very kind of cautious in any moves we made. But it did mean that the debt that I took with me is probably paid off in the first year of being in Dubai.
Wow.
But then, so it's a big change in life. At that point, I was living with my wife, so there's two people earning,
Yeah.
and that obviously also saves then on your accommodation and bills and things as well. So quite quickly, my cost of living probably went down from London, actually, down quite a bit from London, and my income went up. So with that balance, obviously the debt got cleared fairly quickly. Now there was a separate issues that RMGM had problems with debt, and that clients owed them lots of money. There was still a post-financial crisis mess of companies gone bust, banking issues, people paying late, renegotiating fees that are owed. So there's always a big mess, and then collecting their money and how they're arranging it. And our salaries were paid late for most of my time there, actually. But again, being aware of that, I kind of gave myself a notional pay cut and assumed I'd be paid less. But it did all come eventually. And yeah, but I went from having a debt that was growing every month in London to having a surplus. So it paid off.
How did you feel after being in debt for so long and then suddenly was able to pay that off, within 12 months?
I was very relieved, obviously. And the next thing, for the first time in my life, I actually had spare money and I have no idea what to do with it. So I had to do more reading and figure out what you should do when you have spare money. I did have a pension at Hopkins as well that was growing slowly by the legal obligation to put some salary to, but it wasn't that big. It was still way less than the debt. So yeah, it's different. The UAE is just financially very different. There's no tax because they have so much oil that covers a lot of the government kind of costs. There are some taxes. There's now a corporate tax this year. VAT came a few years ago. There's a few hidden taxes, but your salary you don't lose 40% of your salary to pay for things like government, everything that brings, which there's obviously another separate political discussion. There's some countries doing very well with their tax to give good services to people. The UAE is kind of different, where everybody's 90% country is from outside. They don't have a passport from the country. They're here to work. This is now easier to stay. There's a 10-year visa. There's many visas to make it easier to stay longer. But you don't get public education, public health, things like that. That's all through other systems, whether it's yourself or your company or insurance. So it's just, but then at the same time, cars and transport much cheaper. I don't drive, I don't have a car, but the metro is much cheaper than London. Taxis are pretty cheap. Many things are cheaper. Many things are much more expensive as well.
And just out of interest as well, just from my point of view. So if you were to practice out there as an architect and your salary, you were moving from London to Dubai, did you change your bank or open a new bank in Dubai? How did that work?
Well, I've been banking with HSBC since university, when it was probably called Midlands at the time. I think they got me with a £50 free signing up offer, and I've been banking them since. I went to them and said, I'm going to Dubai, and they're very helpful and said, well, okay, yeah, many people work abroad. You open up an account there, you go there, and they make your separate account for Dubai. So no, just stay with HSBC. In the same way, just Standard Chartered. There's a few banks that are kind of multinational you quite easily move around with.
Just a note, we are not sponsored by HSBC. Okay. And it sounds like it was the ideal solution for you because you're still there now, practicing as an architect, and maybe we can talk about that. But I think a lot of people are really interested in the lifestyle. We've got the cost of living crisis in the UK, you're probably aware of, where food inflation, inflation on everything pretty much that we buy is gone through the roof. So what sort of lifestyle can you expect in Dubai as a salaried architect, maybe, if I can put it in that context, rather than a business owner?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it depends on what stage of career you are. And actually, recently with Reba, we've been keen to kind of encourage people to come here, keen for people to go both ways to get more exchange. So sometimes people come over and I end up discussing this with them, and I hear how they get on and finding jobs and things. The pay difference for a kind of part 1 and 2 is probably a bit higher here, but again, you don't pay tax. There are a few exceptions. Over, I know part 1 earning over 40,000 to working on kind of client, not quite client side, but working for engineer. And I know part 2 has been paid about £50,000. However, that's maybe a little. Well, I don't know if they're coming from the UK. They're seen as more valuable in a way. It's you come from the UK, your experience and education is very highly regarded, but sometimes the work you've done can be too alien for here. There's no brick buildings, pitched roofs. But if there's some kind of more the commercial work from the UK, it'll be well received here. And yes, but there are some schools here making part 1 graduates. Part 1 salary is probably like UK in the 20 to 30,000 range. There's not really part 2s here, but then they're probably getting into but then it probably starts being a bit higher, like 35 to 45 for part 2 might be more common. Right. Probably the biggest jump though is if you can run a project and deal with a client. So you've got say 5 to 10 years experience, because then the salaries can start to jump to be nearer to 100,000 a year basically.
That's free.
Now the other thing is the pound has gone down so much. Anything I say now was 20% lower. So yeah, any UAE salary sounds 20% better than it did 10 years ago when I came. Probably actually even more, it's like 25, 30%. So yeah, when I came 10, 12 years ago, the salaries were probably much more comparable. The low pound means that they can sound a bit ridiculously big if you hear of a part 2 earning 45 or something, but it does happen. But yeah, probably the biggest difference though is somebody that's coming in at a more senior level. And then also the tax difference kicks in more as well, because by then you might be paying 40%, 50% tax on your income. But if you're not, it's like the equivalent of doubling it again in the UK. So it can make a big difference. There are some downsides, like well, it used to be it could end any moment. But over my time here, it's got more and more, not more aligned with international norms. It's becoming more and more like other international cities. As I said, there's a new unemployment insurance came in recently. It's getting more and more like other countries, and at the same time, taxes are starting to appear as well. There may be income tax here one day in the next few years. In terms of lifestyle, though, I don't know on the kind of working or the social side, or just quality of life.
Quality of life, definitely, because I think the quality of life in the UK is not so good at present. I think people don't have that spare money to go out like they used to. Maybe five years ago, a lot of people were dining out. Petrol was a lot lower than it is now, but also maybe we could touch on the housing side. If you're renting somewhere compared to, I don't know, like an apartment in Manchester or Edinburgh, London's always going to be sky high. But where would you compare it to?
No, I used to say it's a bit cheaper than London, or if it's similar, you certainly get a lot more space for your money. Recently, the rents went up a lot because Dubai got busy again post-COVID. Back to trying. So right now they are quite high. but I'm trying to give an example. I don't know the price on the UK, so I'm sure it'll be more than Manchester, Edinburgh, Glasgow places.
Yeah.
Probably not, but probably much better deal than London. And also, let me try and convert something. Again, depends if you're living in a flat share on your own, it's a couple. I managed to always find nice places, quite good deals. Actually, if I spent 5 years in a place paying not much more than 1,000 a month. It was a one bed, but a very big one bed, 100 square meter one bed with a balcony and in the kind of the edge of a nice area. Yeah, in the old part next to a nice area, maybe. But maybe standard. I have some colleagues saying it has gone up a bit. The problem, it might be hard to spend less than 1,000 a month. Might be the problem, but unless you probably flat share and things. But the difference might be that you're going to get a lot more space, and every building has a gym and a pool. Take maybe some that came with part 3 and was getting a decent salary, and see what. Let me try and convert my head. Yeah, I mean, if you paid £2,000 a month, which means maybe you're a couple or something, you'd certainly get a 120, 150 square meter flat as a 2-bed, and again, to have pool and gym and everything.
And like you say, it's your taxes. Well, you're not being taxed on your salary, so what you earn is what you get. It's no, it's and again, maybe going back to the sort of lifestyle as well. If you can tell me, about your lifestyle, or maybe what you could expect in your 30s if you were newly qualified architect with a few years experience. What sort of lifestyle you have?
I'll maybe start with someone in their 20s. The thing which is very expensive, I don't know anymore. Alcohol is very expensive. Most things that are entertainment based or a tourist might do tend to be very expensive, actually. But there's a few areas that have nightlife and things, but it's in that sense, it's never going to be anywhere like London or Manchester. There's a few concerts and things, but like a few times a year rather than a few times a week. The nicest things actually like the beach. There's several beaches that are just free and you can walk along. There's actually a lot of cycling in the desert, quite a big cycling community. People tend to find a sport to get into. They can do. And once you have a family, there's lots of play areas and a few parks, family stuff. And it's probably maybe closer to the American lifestyle because of the way it's laid out by roads and the climate, and a bit more urban sprawl away from the main spine of the city. But it's probably on a surface level, high quality of life and very, very safe. And there's quite a lot of nice things to do for medium big city. And places nearby. The thing it doesn't have so much is that kind of maybe the music, art, culture scene is nowhere near as developed. Somewhere like London, there's a bit, but it's probably growing. But it depends a bit stage of life you're at. If you have kids, it's quite a different thing from being in your 20s and wanting to meet people and be out to me, or in the middle when you're sort of a bit more settled but less committed. I mean, I'm talking about Dubai. The other issues that comes up a lot of people going to Saudi Arabia now, which is changing very rapidly. All the laws changing and generally opening up and becoming more easier to live and be there. I spoke to a friend who's been there. It is still a bit of a tough place. There's not much to do. But there, the salaries are even higher. Probably add 30-40%. So some people treat it as like a posting. They'll do a year or two there and then do something else. Especially if they're in the middle of nowhere, Saudi. But that's where quite a lot of the architects from Dubai have gone in the last few years, either to join a client side. They're most likely to join a client there to have probably the big companies have offices there, ACOM, Atkins kind of people. Dubai is the most livable, easiest to live in. Abu Dhabi is actually a very nice place as well. A bit quieter, but there's more nature, beautiful beaches, mangroves, nice environment, just probably not as much going on there in the sort of things to do nightlife side. But Dubai is probably, there's now these global cities where it's Singapore. I've never been to Miami. I assume it's a bit similar. There's towers and a beach. and you see the same stuff, you know, there's Starbucks, Nike, everywhere you go.
Yeah.
There's only a few bits that are old, very tiny bits, authentically old. Very much car-based city, but it's, and I mean, lifestyle-wise, the summer here is is so hot, you basically can't go outside. so you live indoors. There's various malls, cinemas, some quite a lot of indoor play areas. But yeah, you have to deal. It's maybe like in Canada, we have very cold winter and then a livable summer. The summer is quite tough. And yeah, I try and take my holiday in those times.
Yeah, when it's extreme, when it's the
Yeah.
extreme. And what about the working hours? Is it a sort of Monday to Friday like it is in the UK, or is it?
Yeah. Oh, that changed last year. It used to be Sunday to Thursday. It's now Monday to Friday. Um, I think it is quite intense on it. There's a work culture thing. It was very intense. Being a business owner now, I've managed to make that more manageable. And actually, I hear that the companies are different. There's some companies very good in atmosphere, well arranged. They work hard, but not crazy hard. There's some which are bad works, have bad work culture, long hours and things. I think that's probably the same everywhere, though.
Yeah.
There's quite a spectrum of good and bad work cultures. It's maybe there's I mean, there's quite a different attitude to timescale here. Everything's wanted very quickly. You wait for ages for a decision from a client because they're more hierarchical type clients, basically, and then everything's expected immediately. So you tend to be a bit quiet, then crazy busy, then quiet and crazy busy. A bit harder to manage.
All right, I've got three more questions. Maybe they'll all bleed into one another, but firstly, I'd just be interested, would you ever consider coming back to the UK for work? And if you were, what would it take?
But it's got quite hard now because of the financial side. I mean, maybe I'm seeing the worst through the news. It does look like a bad period with cost of living and government crisis and everything. So in the immediate horizon, not really, not likely. I may leave Dubai one day and go to nothing. I'm more likely to go to another country, try another place. So at the moment, not very tempted by the UK. It'd have to be quite a different, quite a lot of changes there actually, which would take many years, I think, to happen. So at the moment, no.
No, that's absolutely fair enough, and I absolutely fully understand it as well. I think many people in your position would give that answer. It's so the next one would be, what are your thoughts on architects' fees? It's been obviously a huge topic in the UK and I think everywhere in the world, but I'm interested in Dubai, and the fees it gets. You're a business owner now. Are they low, high, medium? Or, what is it as an average?
I'd say when I was in London, I didn't get exposed much to the commercial side. I was still in my 20s and things, and around part of free time. When I came here, I did actually armchair. I'm very transparent. I was in the management meetings about the fees we're asking for and getting, and obviously now running a practice. There's a problem here that might even be worse than UK. The kind of race to the bottom when the clients really squeeze you by tendering to drop your fee and say someone else will do it for this, squeezing you down. We actually learned in the business to avoid them completely. It's better not to work than do that, because you get sucked into you take on risk of things going wrong. You're not working very hard for making your profit, and it's better to say no and try other ways, or just wait for the better jobs, the better clients. Yeah. There are some clients here that are paying well. I think some of the big established, the name company, Foster and People, Zaha, will get very good fees, I'm sure, here. But again, there's probably a more broad spectrum in the UK. There are some very well-paying jobs for these very high-profile projects. The kind of commercial, trying it out stuff, though, is probably squeezed more than the UK. And they have more expectations of, actually, quite lower expectations of quality of work and things. is still an emerging market, but the timeline is a bit crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard to say. I think it's probably quite different and more extreme. And there are some people in the market that'll do things very cheaply, but they'll do it very badly. The UK will put our baseline of quality, I'd imagine. But yeah, I was saying we learned to avoid those race to the bottom type projects. Much better to paid, rather do a paid competition, because then if you win it, you tend to be in a better. They're more likely to pay a proper fee for it.
Right.
So we avoid the ones where they just want a fee and they don't even care for any kind of design work, paid design work at the start or anything. Just they ask 10 companies for a fee and pick one of the cheapest. That we realize that's bad for us, and I find it bad for the client. They always end up coming back. Often come back saying, "Oh, can you look at the facade? We don't like the facade we got." Or we talk next time. Don't use this engineer. We got blacklisted. I'm like, well, no wonder you gave them no fee. couldn't do the job.
Absolutely. No, and maybe just lastly, what advice would you give an architect who wanted to come to Dubai, do great work, but also wanted to make a decent, comfortable living, so it doesn't want to go in right at the cheap commercial end, maybe doing them jobs that you've just talked about, but want to do something a little bit more high profile. What advice would you give to them? Because I know you are the chair of the Gulf chapter of Arabia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think if someone coming from the UK to Dubai, if they worked for one of the big well-known companies, that not just UK ones, international ones here, there's probably a chance to work on some very interesting projects. They will be a bit crazy, chaotic, and some crazy things will happen. But things like the Expo, many people working on Expo for the last couple of years. There's some very interesting pavilions there. And there's lots of talk of sustainability, not properly delivered on, but there is some desire, there's momentum in that sense, and there's certainly an interest in being innovative, sustainable things. And so there's some very interesting things happening. They tend to go for these though with the big established companies, so it's probably not a bad way in. And then you'll have a bit more security in a more familiar environment. And then from that, it's always possible to do other things once you've got familiar with the market and the place. So yeah, I mean, that specifically, if coming to Dubai, it'd probably be the same if you went to Asia, I'd imagine. There's also some smaller companies doing interesting things as well, but generally the very interesting work tends to go to the brand name architects here. And although they tend to have quite long hours and things, they're also quite stable, and it means that you can work, and working elsewhere in the region after is much easier. Once you've worked once here, it's much easier to work anywhere. Right. You have something on your CV that you have Middle East experience, and so you're familiar with the timelines, the style, the building code kind of. So yeah, but in a way, there is this, I'd say, a big spectrum of practice. Some very good small practices. You could get a great opportunity in a small practice. We'd probably have a better lifestyle and a more nice intimate team. But it's more based on the practice and whether they have a good, I'd say, good culture or a bad one, which you won't find from asking them. They'll all say they have a good culture. So you have to probably just look a little bit deeper or ask friends to find out which ones actually are good. There's some places that do have a good reputation, and because people don't leave. Anybody you meet that works there says good things about the place and the bosses and everything. There are a few like that. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic to hear, and thank you. Yeah, I need to find a job in Dubai after listening to that. But thank you, Andy, for your time. Really appreciate your talking so openly about this subject, and we've got many more guests to come who are going to join the Broke Architects podcast series. So thank you.
Well, it's a happy ending. I'm not broke now. I did have a broken the naughties.
You were broken the naughties.
It was nice to be asked, because I talk a lot with Reba about kinds of things in conferences. No one actually ever asked about running a business or running your finances, like that. When it is very, but I really feel now I teach at university, Everett Watt here, it's part 1 course. So I deal with people a lot, and through Reba as well. And when I see the salaries in the UK and the tuition fees for students now, I find it shocking. So I do hope there's a way to change the education system and the fees and salaries for young architects. It's not lined up. And the question you asked at the start about, I don't think I'd go into architecture now if I knew it was no.
Now I'd just like to say something about the Architects Benevolent Society. This is a society that is dedicated to supporting past and present members of the architectural community and their families in times of need, from those starting out on their careers to those who are now in retirement. They help people who have experienced illness, accident, redundancy, unemployment, bereavement, or other personal difficulties. Now, support ranges from confidential advice to financial assistance. Now, my ask to you all who's listening is consider giving a donation. There's many ways you can do this, and you can even volunteer for the ABS and even fundraise. And also you can also leave a gift in your will. So who do the Architects Benevolent Society help? Well, architects, architectural technologists, landscape architects, and employees of architectural practices, but also the dependents of the professions I've just stated there. They also help and support students of architecture, architectural technology, or landscape architecture. Now, for more information on eligibility and to apply for help, please go to the ABS website, which is absnet.org.uk. Thank you. Please share, subscribe, and comment to support the channel.
The Broke Architect.